Hi, and welcome. I'm Susan Barashai, founder of C Admissions, and we specialize in helping professionals navigate the MBA admission. Today, we're particularly talking about those making career transitions into technology. Some of the things that we see constantly is intelligent, accomplished individuals who've decided they want to pivot into technology. And of course, Google or AI, the best MBA program for technology, and end up with the same handful of schools that everyone talks about. And they may miss that this decision has many layers most applicants never really consider. So today we're looking at 4 particular schools: Kellogg, Ross, Fuqua, and Anderson, that offer different pathways into technology. I'm not here to tell you which school is the best, quote unquote, for technology. What I'm here to do is to show you that each school has this distinct strengths that might make one objectively better than the other ones. So that is, of course, it's always based on your own circumstances, your own aspirations, and where you want to go. Understanding which one requires asking thoughtful questions that most applicants are asking at the end of the process, as opposed to asking them at the beginning of the process, which sets the stage for what you target, how you approach schools, etc. So let's get started. So let me just discuss first the first layer of complexity most applicants don't really consider. When schools report X% of our graduates go into tech, they're lumping together fundamentally different career paths. Some are doing product management at Amazon, or a person doing product management at Amazon is having a completely different career experience than someone doing tech consulting at BCG, which is different from someone doing digital strategy at a consumer goods company. All 3 count as tech transitions in employment reports, but they're different careers with different recruiting processes, different skill requirements, and different long-term trajectory. So where it gets really interesting is Kellogg, Ross, Fuqua, and UCLA Anderson each have different strengths across these pathways. One school might have exceptional access to pure tech companies, but limited tech consulting placements. Another might be the opposite. Which matters to you depends on what you actually want. And most people haven't clarified that before they start researching the schools. This is definitely the kind of strategic thinking we place here at CIA Admissions when we go through school selection process with our clients. Because choosing schools before you understand what you're choosing them for is definitely backward thinking, and it will set you up for a lot of heartache and misalignment along the way, which we definitely want to try to avoid. The second layer is employment data is a starting point and not the answer. You don't have access to the back end of how these numbers came to be. So each school publishes beautiful employment reports with percentages and salary data. What they don't show you is the nuance that actually determines whether that school is working for you in terms of what you want to do. They don't break out whether those tech placements are product management roles everyone wants versus operations roles that don't have clear tech career paths. They don't tell you that some placements came through structured recruiting relationships, while others required relentless networking and cold outreach. And you're definitely not seeing which of those opportunities showed up in those different veins. And also, you don't necessarily see the skill set required for those individuals who made those transitions successfully. They don't tell you which pathways are realistic given your specific finance background and your specific career trajectory to date. Someone coming from tech investment banking has different positioning than someone coming from corporate FP&A. Both can transition to technology for sure, but the optimal school choice might be completely different between these two backgrounds. And they don't address cultural fit in those employment reports, whether the school's environment will help you thrive or burn you out during recruiting. And what we do here is we help clients decode this data through the lens of their specific profile and their specific goals. Because obviously the more generic your research is, it's going to lead to more generic advice and or decisions rather, and generic decisions are going to lead to suboptimal outputs. And your job should be at this point to make as informed decisions as you can, so that whatever you say yes to in terms of applications, and whichever school says yes to you, you have the strongest chance of getting closer to your goals as you navigate this process. So let me show you how different these schools actually really are, and we're going to start with Kellogg. Kellogg places over 20% of grads into technology company. That's higher than most people realize, and it's very competitive with schools specifically known for tech. I have this conversation oftentimes. People label Kellogg as a consulting school and don't realize just how much effort they've put into changing that narrative that hasn't caught up to the sort of mainstream MBA conversations. The product management function alone represents 9% of placement with a median salary of about 169,000 USD. What makes Kellogg really interesting that you're not choosing between tech or consulting. You have strong access to both pathways. So 35% go into consulting firms, many with substantial tech practices. So if you're someone who wants to work in tech problems, but you're not 100% certain you want to be at a pure tech company, Kellogg gives you both options to explore. You can recruit for pure tech roles like at Amazon, Microsoft, or other software companies, or you can go to McKinsey, BCG, Bain, and work in their tech consulting practices. This optionality matters for finance professionals making this transition because you're not locked into one pathway during recruiting, which in the market that we're in, it's really important. You have an opportunity to test both, see what resonates, and make an informed choice as you graduate, which obviously, given that you have 2 years, you do have also that optionality to change your mind. The cultural considerations still going to apply. Kellogg is intensely collaborative, which affects the recruiting, how recruiting happens. And the specific types of tech companies recruiting versus consulting firms recruiting create different positioning requirements for you. When we work with clients through this process, we understand whether this dual pathway optionality is an advantage for an individual's profile or whether they'd be better serving at a school with concentrated strength in one direction. It is, again, very much individual journey, individual decision of the applicant, but your job is to really understand what those nuances look like for you. Let's move on to Ross. Ross's tech story isn't about having the highest percentage, it's about the quality and type of placement. Ross has built strong product management pipelines specifically. Amazon is one of its top employers with 10 full-time tech hires in their last employment report. But what's particularly strategic is how Ross builds internship relationships to companies like Google, Apple, and that hire fewer full-time MBAs directly, or at least in this recent sort of space that we're currently in. The MAP, which stands for Multidisciplinary Action Project, matters exceptionally here. If you are coming from finance, where everything was models and theory, you want hands-on product experience before recruiting. Ross gives you that positioning that employers absolutely love. It's a systematic preparation for PM roles specifically, and you will have the resources and the support. Of course, this goes without saying, but I feel like sometimes I have to say this. You will get out of every school what you put into it. Meaning, if you are hustling, you will get the opportunities. Just because a school can give you all the tools, if recruiting becomes difficult, it is the reality of the market that is no school specifically responsible for. The strategic question you should be asking is that, or you should be understanding, is that product management roles require specific positioning. You need to demonstrate you can think commercially, but interface also with engineers. Your finance background needs to translate into something that sounds like, I understand how to make product decision with business judgment. While the raw-specific PM pipeline approach works for your background and personality versus another school's broader tech access or consulting bridge, depends on your profile and your goals, and you have to keep that in mind at all times. Of course, no school is ever going to be perfect, but you have to find what is non-negotiable for you. The transitioning to Fuqua and Anderson, these are two schools that offer most specialized positioning of the four we're examining today. Fuqua has healthcare technology access that is harder to find elsewhere. So if you are in healthcare finance thinking about technology, this ecosystem can be extremely important to you in terms of where you go. Fuqua also has strong consulting placement that many students use strategically as a bridge into technology. So that means you get your consulting offers, but tech expertise, then you make the pivot down the line. Anderson has the highest pure tech placement percentage of these four schools at about 26%, and offers this California tech ecosystem that, of course, you all know, I'm sure. But this is a little bit different than the Silicon Valley. So we're looking at entertainment technology, gaming, streaming platforms, aerospace technology. So if you want to work on tech at Disney, Netflix, gaming companies, Anderson's network is going to be unmatched if that is your concrete, specific pathway. If you are still unsure, then you really have to assess where you're going in terms of what the opportunity cost is going to look like. Both schools have distinct cultural environment and geographic implication. Fuqua is intensely collaborative. So Team Fuqua, you will hear about it all the time. It is absolutely real. Anderson is more pre-professional and career focused. You have a lot of resources. You have industry specific coaches and experts on campus to support you. And you definitely need to be very much engaged in the process if you want to reap the rewards of those opportunities. The strategic question you should be asking is, do either the specialized ecosystem, so healthcare tech or Southern California entertainment media tech, align with where I want to build my career? If the answer is yes, these schools offer access that's difficult to replicate elsewhere because of where they're emphasizing in terms of what's important to them. But if not, their higher or lower placement percentage is not going to necessarily matter. So this is why we do specific research when we work with our clients, because your school selection is going to be dependent on what you want to do. The best school depends entirely on your specific goals, your specific backgrounds, and what kind of tech ecosystem you want to access. That is going to require a strategic assessment. It's going to require a process so that you are not rushing into, I want to find the best schools now. Rather, you're going through the process in a way that it's systematic and is going to help you get to the optimal schools for you and your goals. And of course, you're not just depending on the best school that you find on the internet. What I see constantly is people apply to school before they have clarified what they're applying for. That is the biggest challenge that you will face if you are going through the process for round one or in the future, that you need to know why. Why are you going to business school? Not thinking deeply about whether you want pure tech or tech consulting, because oftentimes people don't really realize that those are two different and distinct pathways. Makes a difference in the school selection. Also, one of the other elements that I see in applicants is they don't initially get specific about the roles that they want to hold. So they'll say, I want to do product management. And that is definitely going to be different than I want to do corporate strategy at a tech company. And that's different that I want to do business operations, because the role that you're going to have is also going to dictate how you're going to be ready and how you're going to prepare. And different schools have different strengths in each one of those. The other thing is that applicants oftentimes don't assess specific finance background positioning that they have, and how that can help them in their credibility story, because obviously you are not going and telling them, I am a tabula rasa, blank slate here, fill the pages for me, right? You're coming in, you have at least, or an average of 5 years of work experience, and you're coming in with that experience. How is that going to be valuable in where you're going next? Also, oftentimes applicants are leaving the really important question out of the picture until later down the line when they have offers in hand, and that's the culture fit. When you're going through this process, you have to be extremely thoughtful about the energy you are exuding and you are putting on the work of your applications. If you are not, if you are, working on many different applications and you haven't looked at the culture fit, when the decision comes, you may be shocked when you get rejected because you are a competitive candidate in numbers, but you may not match its culture. Or you may get an opportunity to actually get an offer of admission. And then you realize in the process of, because this is a journey, it's not one moment in time, you realize that you really didn't connect with anyone that you spoke to, and therefore that application was a waste. That is something we want to avoid as much as possible in your decision process. And when we work with candidates through this process, these are all the consideration we are taking into account as we're guiding them through the school selection and helping them position themselves for a very strong application. So what matters in your application is that admission officers, is your understanding that admission officers at these schools read hundreds of essays from finance professionals saying, I want to transition to technology. Most are generic, and also most of those that are generic are getting rejected. What works is specificity grounded in strategic thinking. I'm targeting product management roles at established tech companies because my background in consumer goods brand management translates directly. Kellogg's marketing strength, consulting firm access gives me multiple pathways. I've networked with this many Kellogg alum who made this exact transition and understand the recruiting timeline. that is specific. You give the interviewer a sense that you understand you have thought through this process strategically, right? And that demonstrates that you've done, obviously, your research, understand why this particular school makes sense for you and your goal. The work we do at SIA Admissions in terms of working with clients is helping them develop that strategic clarity. We start with getting to know them. We work with figuring out what they actually want, which schools align with what they want, and how to position their background competitively for those specific programs, integrating their authentic, interests and what kind of experiences they're looking for, but also taking into account, obviously, what schools are looking for. Because the differences that we've seen with applicants being admitted and the ones rejected often isn't their stats or their resume. It's whether they articulate a clear strategic narrative for why this transition makes sense and why this school is the right vehicle. Of course, when I talk about whether this transition makes sense, is integrating the past and the future. So it's not just a future forward-looking approach. So absolutely generic application from finance people and others who are wanting to make a pivot get rejected oftentimes. And because that oftentimes happens because that strategic application isn't grounded in deep school research and self-assessment and self-awareness that determines that outcome. So we looked at 4 schools with very different strengths for finance to tech transitions. These schools aren't better or worse. They're different from one another, and which one is optimal for you depends on variables we've discussed today. What you want, how your background translates, where you want to build your career, and what culture you need to succeed. This is the kind of strategic work that we do here at SIA Admissions with our clients, and clarify what you actually want from this transition. It's going to be a really important process. We work with limited number of clients each round and each cycle because this work requires deep engagement from us as coaches. So if you're serious about making this transition and you want to be strategic about it, you want to, not leave anything to chance, feel free to reach out and book a consultation to discuss how our approach can support you and your goals. But if you're not ready for that yet, and you just want to consider how your background positions you for a transition, we do have a free profile evaluation. It is a written email that you receive from me personally that will lay out where your strengths and where your weaknesses are and things you need to keep in mind. And from there, then we can decide if a conversation is something that you want to have in terms of discussing if you want to work together. So we have about 7 minutes. Let's open the floor to questions. And wherever you're joining us from, please feel free to add those questions to the chat box of all of your, wherever you're joining us from. While we wait for those, why don't we start with some questions that came through the registration form? How do different schools evaluate prior exposure to technology when I come from finance? Excellent question. This is actually something that often applicants get confused about. And why I say this is because obviously if you're making a transition, oftentimes you're not going to have direct exposure to that industry. So you want to showcase indirect exposure, or you also want to identify what role you want to play so that you can communicate transferable skills and why your specific background is valuable in technology. Obviously, someone coming from finance background, depending on what kind of finance role they have, of course, is going to be valuable for a technology company because you have had opportunities to evaluate other companies. If you are in investment banking, you've had opportunities to see how other people do things, and your perspective can be very valuable in that environment. However, no one is going to extrapolate that from your story if you do not communicate it in your story to begin with. So your job as a career transitioner, if that's a word, is to actually reflect deeply on what your experiences have been, how you are distinct from your peer who sits 2 cubicles down from you, who's also applying to business school, and has probably very similar experiences to you. How do you differentiate your experiences from them so that when you apply to these schools, you are going to have a differentiated application that is compelling enough for the admission team to say yes? And obviously be able then for you to leverage the resources at business school to make your pivots to tech. How do we decide whether to apply now or wait a year when my profile feels strong, yet my tech exposure feels incomplete? To be very honest, your profile is never going to be fully ready, right? Your job is to assess how ready it is at this point and how much more can I grow if I wait a year. It also depends on how old you are. Obviously, there's age in that plays into the picture. Not necessarily that technology companies are looking at your age per se, but how old are you by the time that you graduate will also determine the probability of you being able to attend those coveted business schools and what experiences you bring to the table. So you want to take into account not just when you're ready, but also when you are positioning yourself optimally for what you want to do. From there, I would also look at how much is your profile going to develop between this year and next year. If you have an opportunity to really work on some impressive projects, wait a year, because obviously a much more compelling profile is going to mean much more compelling offers, as well as much more compelling merit scholarships, right? So it makes sense sometimes to wait to reap the greater rewards. However, if you assess the opportunities at the company that you are working at and you don't see drastic changes, waiting for a year makes no sense. Just if you've decided you want to apply this year and go through the process. Obviously, be very thoughtful in your journey in terms of how you're presenting yourself to, again, communicate those transferable skills towards your future role that you want to have. All right, last question. How do I explain my move toward tech in essays without sounding like someone chasing trends? I love this question because this is something that we are very conscientious when we work with clients on this process specifically. I mean, I'm sure you speak with people and they all sound the same. I want to work into consulting. I want to move into technology. I want to move into insert sector or insert job. And when you talk to them, they may give you that answer, but what got them into school, they're not necessarily regurgitating exactly what got them into the school, right? What we have found, and in our process, in our journey, is that the applicants who have been very thoughtful in connecting their future goals with something that matters to them, either personally or professionally, what they have seen is going to be the thing that makes you different, right? You're not just chasing trends. You have seen a problem that you want to solve in the world, and you are moving towards that direction. We follow, here at SIA, we use Simon Sinek's methodology of start with your why, right? Why it is that you want to do tech, that you want to move into technology. What is the problem that you want to solve? Because you are a global leader who is going to essentially change the world. So what are you here to do, and why should they give you specifically a seat at their table and not someone else? That's your job to communicate to the admission team. All right, we're gonna continue the series next week also. We will be posting our event in the next day or so. So please join our subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have not, you'll be notified when future events are being held. If you haven't joined our newsletter, please do so. We will send you information on future events there as well. And if you register for our events, we always send a replay. So even if you miss it live, you have an opportunity to watch the replay afterwards. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Hi, I'm Susan Barashai, founder of C Admissions. If you'd like to go deeper into MBA strategy, watch the next video here. And if you want more insights on building a standout application, click here to subscribe.